Hi, my name is Bob McGeary. I'm a CyberRes Presales Engineer at Micro Focus. Thanks for visiting our Unplugged channel. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Zero Trust, learn a little bit more about it, how to get started, where you want to end up, and where we might be able to help you at Micro Focus. Zero Trust is a lot of things to a lot of people, but at its very core, it's the ability to enforce least privilege access. The really interesting about that is that least privilege controls are evolving massively and quickly. So originally, they were rather static, limited scope privilege controls. It was either a yes or no, whether you got on the network, were you an employee or not? Yes or no, if you got to a system, you might have to be handed admin controls just to use the system, which was messy. And the discretionary controls that we had for invoking least privilege were very awkward. Compare that to today, where we can have on-demand decision-making at the point of request. We can apply purpose-based rules and requirements to how people get to data. We have a very powerful set of user behavior analytics that we can apply. So should a person be able to get in after hours? Should they be able to get in if they're not using their own device or a blessed device by your organization? And when they do get in, what should they see and what kind of data should they be able to access? We're able to set up micro perimeters. A lot of times that's based on microservices, handing out just a function of an application instead of the whole application itself, or part of the data instead of the whole data pool itself. We can have discretion on the type of data we're handing out. Is it sensitive data? Is it audited data? Is it controlled data? Is it privacy data? So all that can be attributed. The ability to apply real-time risk scoring completely moves us out of static-based controls into something that's very dynamic and alive, and that's a super powerful tool that we have now. We also now have the capability of providing continuous reassessment so that we can always take a look at who's getting in, how they're getting in, what's the method of their getting in. Is it a direct connection to a front-end application? Are they coming around the side door using an API? All those kind of things we can assess continuously. And also, is it that same person who first logged on? Do we want to continually validate, are they who they say they are? And underneath all of this is the ability to have as complete visibility as possible to the resources and the access that are being given out to people, and to be able to govern them. And we'll talk about governance a lot through this short presentation. Governance is the ability to take a look at your policies, the effect of the policies, the effectiveness of the policies, and whether or not they're really being enforced. And that's just incredibly powerful. We can now support privacy, and should you have ownership over your own data? Should you know where it's being used? Should you be able to retract control if you want to? And also, as many things as possible get out of the hands of administrators. Anything the user can do themselves when it's appropriate, that just makes everybody's life easier. And probably the thing that's evolving most quickly over time now is the ability to apply machine learning and what we'll call artificial intelligence, and bring all that data science analysis directly to the data, with as few humans involved, moving sliders and buttons. So our friends at NIST have a lot to say about zero trust architecture. And if you read any of their documentation, they basically have 7 tenets that they're trying to get across. And it's all around, how do you effectively enforce least privilege? So basically, everything you have out there is a resource, all the data, all your computing services, all your applications, and you should be able to know what your applications are, know what your resources are, and how they're being used. All communication is secured regardless of network location. Remember, we don't trust the network anymore. We don't trust our own networks. We don't trust the public networks. So we act in accordance with that lack of trust so that we put the right kind of protections in place regardless of how a user is accessing the data. Also extremely important and often overlooked is we're providing access to resources granted on a per session or a per request basis. So these days of walking around with rights and privileges, and that's almost gone, and it's shrinking as we speak. Because what we really want is to assess a person when they come in, make the request. What's their posture? Are they coming in from the right place at the right time with the right kind of behavior? Did we get the right kind of authentication for them? Are they accessing data that's more sensitive? Do we need to step up their authentication? So all those decisions that you can make at the time of access just makes it a much more lively, alive ecosystem. And tenet number 4 is very similar. You should have a very dynamic policy based on observable attributes, attributes about the data, attributes about the user, attributes about the method, etc. Tenet 5, you should be able to monitor the integrity and security posture of all the assets. These days of set it and forget it security policies are gone. You have to be able to ascertain if your policies are doing what you thought they were going to do, and if they need to be tweaked over time. Also, super important, authentication and authorization is dynamic, strictly enforced prior to access. We've kind of touched on that already. And once again, there should just be continuous oversight of what your assets are and the ability to fine-tune what your security controls should be over those. So thank you, NIST. So that all sounds good. But as you look around, you'll see that there's just a million approaches to zero trust architecture, because it's not a prescribed architecture, it's a framework. So if you look all around, you'll see that NIST has its own diagram for what a zero trust framework should look like. And there are generic models that all are trying to do the same thing, is to quantify who's getting to what and how they're getting there. Azure has its own model. Google has its Beyond Court model, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'll be focusing mostly today on the NIST model, because that's very, very indicative of the kind of controls that you should have. To go further than that, not only do you have all kinds of different models, there are different descriptions of what's important to a zero trust architecture. So the pillars is what some people call them, the capability models, or what other people call them. Those differ between different organizations. You may have 6 or 7 different pillars that you think are important about what a zero trust ecosystem should be, and how do you mature over time into a zero trust. So Booz Hamilton has their own model, and Gartner, they have their own model. They don't call it zero trust. They call it their continuous adaptive risk and trust assessment, or CARTA. And it's the same idea, right? We really want to have a living, breathing ecosystem that controls the ability of a user to get just to the data and the applications and the resources that they have to, and nothing more. So I won't go into all these, there's a million of them. But the upshot that I want to get to is that, and this is one of the things that NIST put out in their most recent document about how to implement a zero trust. They have this idea of the crawl phase, the baby steps of how to get going with zero trust. And for them, that's called the enhanced identity governance phase. And I really like the way they put this together, because as we'll see as we go along here, the foundation of any zero trust architecture is the ability to identify who's getting to what and how. So it is a good way to get started. And the purpose is this, right? A user comes in and they have a request to get to a resource. And we have all these systems and controls and moving parts behind the scenes that are all working together to do one thing, right? They want to either allow or deny access. And that's kind of black and white, because we may give them access. We may decide to continue that access or not. We may decide to revoke it. We may decide to limit their session access. We may limit the kind of data they get to. We may say, wait a minute, you started out just doing your normal user activities, but now you have a request to get into sensitive data. So now I'm going to step up my level of authentication. I might need another factor, or I might need biometrics, to actually let you in there. And our ability to continually analyze and reevaluate is just critical to a good zero trust implementation. So if you look at the, some of the government publications of how you should mature into a, basically starter method of zero trust to a more advanced or an optimal method, you'll see the things they're shooting for identity is continuous validation, real-time machine learning analysis on those identities. For devices, they want to constantly validate the devices, fingerprint them. Are they healthy? Should they be allowed in? Is there something about the device that's different today that was not the same yesterday? Should that make me worried? Should my risk score go up? So real-time risk analytics, super important. Also, to be able to create micro perimeters and to have machine learning-based threat protection. We're really trying to guard against east-west malfeasance here. We don't want people getting into a network or into a server and being able to jump or pivot from that to other places. So the more you can establish a micro perimeter with the controls for zero trust, the better you're going to be. For application workloads, once again, continuous authorization, as I've been preaching on this whole time. And here's another thing it's often very overlooked is workflow integration, because it's great to say that, yeah, we want to make sure that, we're enforcing least privilege and user A can't get to resource X unless they jump through these hoops. Well, there has to be a process to make sure that happens. So that's why I love workflow tooling that allows you to completely map out, how do I approve someone to getting to a resource that they should get to, but only in the way that they should, and only to the kinds of data they should. And having that integrated into a workflow engine can make that job much more visible, much more logical, and much more controllable. Last, and certainly not least, when we're looking at data, we definitely want to get dynamic support of data. When we're looking constantly at how this data is getting access. Is it through the front door, right? Application front end? Is it coming through the side door, through some API, or maybe some developer or administrator is coming around the side with their elevated credentials? So, do we have a good privilege access management program in place? Or is someone coming through the back door, through a method that we don't normally monitor? So the ability to do all those things for your dynamic data support is just critical. And of course, all data should be encrypted. It should be encrypted at rest. It should be encrypted in motion, and it might be encrypted by attribute. So yeah. So should you be able to look up someone's social security number? Well, you should be able to look up your own, but what about someone else's? Should you be permitted to see the last four, the first three? Should it just be replaced with encrypted character set? These are all things that are possible now that weren't 5 years ago. And if I could preach on anything today, integration is key. There's a lot of moving parts to a cybersecurity solution for an organization, period. And of course, the same thing is true for a zero trust ecosystem. Everything's a security feed in your organization now, right? You've got internal security feeds from your firewalls and your antivirus and from your SOAR systems and your SIEM systems. They're all providing good usable security information. And you've got external security feeds. And the ability to integrate all those moving parts together so they're all communicating well. They've got a common event framework that can produce excellent, usable information is extremely vital. And it's probably one of the biggest challenges today. And there are a lot of challenges to doing a really effective zero trust project. As we've looked at, the approaches are not universally understood or accepted. Everybody has their own idea. And quite frankly, when you read some of the documentation, you'll still see there's a lot of legacy network security thinking behind some of the principles, whereas one of the basic tenets of zero trust is we no longer trust the network. So I find that can be a problem sometimes. Also, this is a complex operation. We're basically turning traditional network security on its head, right? We now want to be very prescriptive about who gets to what data and how, and before we didn't do that. So to be able to manage that kind of defense in depth and those layers of securities using multiple solutions, multiple vendors, that can be quite a juggling act, and quite often an impossible juggling act. until you find the right solution and the right vendor. And of course, these different vendors, they're not particularly motivated to integrate with each other all the time. So sometimes it's a mixed bag as to how well you can get these different solutions to talk to each other and to provide a coherent risk score, for instance. And we're collecting a lot of data, but a lot of it gets lost. It's noise, right? We're not treating redundant data very well. We're not able to pick out the important data very well. So that's another challenge. So anytime you're looking at a zero trust solution, it's very critical that eventually get to the point where all this data can be handled and produce results that you can use. And that's really the great benefit of these new data science, machine learning assisted solutions like we have here at CyberRes. They can really take that burden of managing all that data and make it something actually quite feasible. Something as simple as knowing what your current state is, having visibility in that can be a challenge, and knowing the state that you want to get to. And for a lot of our customers, how long till I get to my value? That can be very unmeasured. So it's important to understand what your goals are, how to get to those goals, and be able to measure, when you're getting the value that you need out of it. And if you're not, that's the beauty of zero trust. You take a step back, you reassess and say, well, how do I get to my next goal in a timely and cost-effective manner? So for me, the feasible steps to get to a zero trust ecosystem: step one, you have to have a very solid foundation of an identity solution that's handling your identity lifecycle management, your identity governance. I've kind of thrown device governance in here because as far as I'm concerned, a device has an identity also. Step two, you want to have a very strong access management framework that includes the ability to do federation and single sign-on, to have adaptive authentication, purpose-based assessment. If someone's trying to get to privileged resources, they should have a privilege access management component to it. You should have data governance solution. You should be able to see how your data is being accessed and how it's being used at all times. To be able to put that whole layer of, what's the purpose for this data and what purpose am I serving by handing it out can have a big impact on the way that you create a zero trust architecture. It should be able to do data type and attribute mapping so it knows what kind of data is being handed out to whom. And it should also be able to provide with privacy and ownership awareness so that you can do self-management of data, and you can also really be tight on your granular controls of how people get to that data. And step four, a step that is all too often overlooked, is your solution should have that overarching visibility and analytics capabilities to the solution. I can't stress enough the importance of being able to do real-time risk assessment, and you can only do that if you've got excellent visibility analytics, and oftentimes that turns into your integration hub for all of your security feeds. So the good news is that Micro Focus CyberRes can help. We have a family of cyber resilience solutions that play in all parts of the NIST framework, doing a zero trust enhanced identity governance-based solution. So in the NIST model, there's a policy enforcement point that says yes or no, or how much yes a person can get to a resource. There's a policy decision point that has the policy engine with the rules and roles, and the policy administration where that can all be managed. And then behind the scenes are all the policy information points, right? How do we know what identities we should be handling? How do we know people who they say they are? How do we handle APIs and privilege access management? How do we ensure that our endpoints are secure? Do we have the right kind of analytics against that? And do we have the right kind of data security? So our NetIQ family of solutions handles all of the identity management framework and foundation that you need. We also do the access management, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, step-up authentication, second-factor authentication. We do ID federation, ID governments, access management, credential management. And because of that, we fit right into this model and we can function as a policy enforcement point and a policy engine and a policy administration point. And we have all the building blocks for your ICAM component of your policy information points. Endpoint data protection and advanced endpoint protection. We have a lot of authorized partners that we work for malware protection and antivirus and all the endpoint protection. I really won't go into all of those today. We can have a separate discussion on that in another episode. Our Voltage family of data protection has an extremely powerful set of capabilities for providing data confidentiality, integrity, availability, to give you the right kind of data access policies so that you can be very stringent on the kind of data that you hand out to any user at any time. And for that overarching visibility and analytics, we have really trend-setting solution in our ArcSight Intelligence suite of solutions. The ability to apply machine learning and human-assisted and human-absent levels of analysis is really impressive, and hopefully we'll have a chance to have an episode on that in the future as well. In summary, we can be extremely beneficial as you're trying to accomplish this enhanced identity governance crawl phase. The ability to have a primary vendor for these different components that all must work together and must provide good, meaningful, adaptive intelligence is critical. And so to have a primary vendor that has so many of these solutions all in one place can just make life much simpler and much more cost effective and much more efficient. And just to circle back to NIST, this is basically how our CyberRes portfolio maps to the 7 tenets. And I hope you all give us a chance to take a look at your zero trust needs and to show you what we could do for you. Thank you very much.